Indigenous people in the Peruvian Amazon, especially the northern part of the Peruvian Amazon, have been protesting since April 9th. They have been asking the government to repeal a series of decree laws that were passed in 2008, last year, and which they say will affect their rights to their land and to the resources on their land. We have asked Richard Smith, who is the director of the Instituto del Bien Común here in Lima, to join us this evening. Richard Smith is an anthropologist. He has spent 30 years in Peru, 13 of them living in indigenous communities, and he's here to talk with us about indigenous and environmental issues and what lies behind this protest in the Amazon. Welcome.
Thank you.
The decree laws that were passed last year were passed as part of a package that was meant to implement the free trade agreement with the United States. What is it about these laws that particularly has earned the wrath of indigenous communities both in the Amazon and in the Andes?
Well, I think there's two main issues behind this. The laws were decreed, that is, the Congress gave the executive special powers to decree laws that would allow Peru to conform to a few of the conditions that were set by the U.S. government regarding the implementation of the free trade agreement. So in the first place, almost 100 laws were decreed by the executive government, which were not consulted with anyone in the country. They were simply decreed, written by the executive and decreed. One of the major issues of this protest is the fact that Peru is a signatory to Convention 169 of the ILO regarding the rights of indigenous peoples. Peru is signatory, therefore Convention 169 is law here in Peru, and that convention makes it very clear that the Peruvian government, the Peruvian state, is obliged to consult any change in legislation which will directly affect indigenous peoples. At least a half dozen of these, and probably more, of these decrees directly affect indigenous peoples, especially their lands, their resources, their access to those guarantees around land and resources. None of them were consulted with the indigenous people. So that's one major issue which has made indigenous peoples very angry.
There have been there have been blockades of highways, there have been blockades of rivers, particularly to stop boats from reaching petroleum installations.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that there's a large group of people at pumping station 6 on the northern oil pipeline that takes oil out of the central part of the central northern part of the rainforest to the coast. What is the situation in the Amazon there, and what have you heard about how the communities are reacting to what they perceive as this threat?
But I think as the days have gone by and as the word has spread to more distant communities, more and more communities are participating. And the northern part, Amazonas province, Amazonas region, Condorcanqui province, is long known for its, these are Jivaron peoples who pride themselves in their skills in war making traditionally, and they're to be feared. They're fierce, and what I heard was there are about 10,000 people in that area alone, divided between the pumping station, a main bridge on the highway, and several other points. But it's also important to know that local peoples, non-indigenous peoples, have joined in this, as they did last year in August and September. People in Bagua, the small city of Bagua, giving food to the protesters, giving them places to sleep, and supporting. I was there not too long ago and heard a lot about the coming strike and the past strike as well. So
This takeover of the oil pumping station is both practical and symbolic. It's practical because it's a strategic point of pressure on the government, but it's also symbolic because oil is really one of the key issues of development in the Amazon. Indigenous people have the right to their land. They have the right to the resources on the surface of their land, but they don't have ownership of the resources below the surface. Mm-hmm. The oil, minerals belong to the state. Right. And the position of even the environment minister, I heard the other day, is that the state needs to be able to extract these resources for the good of all Peruvians. And these communities don't have the right to obstruct something that is for the good of all Peruvians. The indigenous people along the Rio Corrientes, the Corrientes River in the north, have had an extremely bad experience with oil production. There was 40 years worth of environmental damage there. There are people who have high levels of lead and cadmium in their blood, probably from the metals that have come out of the production waters that were dumped for years into the rivers. There's now a law that says that production water from oil wells has to be re-injected. But the damage is still done, and people have that memory of the damage that has been done and the health problems that have resulted from that. Is there a different model for development? From other countries, from experiences in other countries, are there other ways of handling the issue of access to resources like oil? Ultimately, should indigenous communities have the right to say yes or no to the exploitation of resources on and under their soil? The new Declaration of Indigenous Rights of the United Nations would seem to indicate that should be considered in national law.
That's certainly the direction that international law has been taking over the past 25 years. That is, to recognize indigenous peoples as original peoples, as having a series of collective rights that go beyond individual rights,